we are ego-driven creatures. And it is a hard thing to do, to put our ego to the side and put the blame on ourselves and pants ourselves and show our vulnerability to someone we really don't have a positive feeling towards right now. If you're a cashier or you're a cook in a restaurant and you have a customer who is shouting at you and being aggressive, you don't want to be polite to them. You want to spit in their food, but you have to sometimes pants yourself and be polite, and then you see them chill out. You see them feel bad, become sympathetic.
Welcome back to the show, Abbie. Great to have you.
Great to be here.
Persuasion often gets a bad rap, and I think there's some negative connotation that goes along with it. What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions that people have around persuasion and influence?
Well, I think a lot of people think that it gets rid of your free will, that if someone is really persuasive, that it means that, they're going to be in control of you. But we also have to remember that we can say no. And we don't have to be persuaded. So if you teach people about persuasion, you can teach them how to protect against people using it negatively. So people kind of have that fear of like, oh, well, if you're teaching persuasion, you're teaching people how to make others do things without their knowledge. And it's like, well, we also have free will. So it's not quite what it seems.
There's another component to that as well. I have to make content for the Art of Charm, and I constantly get complaints that I'm teaching dark empathy skills, as if this is some Machiavellian concept. The reality is these are common skills that marketers and understood in psychology, and they give you an edge above everybody else to do what you need to do in life. All of this information is online. And now we live in an AI world. If I want to learn how to persuade somebody, I'm going to look it up and I'm going to use it to my advantage.
Absolutely.
People have to have an understanding that just because they are not educated on these topics doesn't mean that no one else can use them.
Yeah, and we forget too, it's not just business people that use these techniques. Social engineering, trying to elicit information from someone or make someone do something you want them to do.
Sure.
Kids do it. They ask for a favor from mom. Mom says no. So they adapt their approach and go ask dad. That is technically social engineering. Or you find when you're like, oh, my partner is being oddly kind to me. They're being really wonderful. And the next thing you know, they ask you for a favor, or they want to stay out a little bit later, or anything like that. That is social engineering. That is all influence and persuasion. And the way I try and teach it is absolutely the techniques that I teach can be used for bad. Of course they can.
Sure.
I don't promote them for bad. I promote ethical influence. And you can also teach it slightly differently. Instead of using techniques that influence negative emotions, like you can get people to do things out of fear or anger, we don't create negative emotions on purpose because that is harmful. So we get them to do it because they want to do it. We create trust and cooperation. And I don't promote the use of these unethically, but I can't make you use them in a certain way. That's your choice. We just have to have our own initiative of, is this going to actually harm someone? And if so, then let me take a different approach.
And also understanding the concepts allow you to know if someone's trying to harm you, which I think is another important point in all of this.
Absolutely.
So you introduced this concept of pro-social engineering in the book. What do you mean by that? Because I know our audience has heard of social engineering before.
Pro-social behavior means behavior that benefits other people. And when I think about social engineering, it's so negative because it's about eliciting information in a scam or a malicious attack, or you're trying to get someone's address or social security number to then commit fraud or commit some kind of attack. And that is social engineering as we think about it. But the way that I teach it is you're not trying to influence someone into maladaptive or negative behavior. You're trying to influence trust and cooperation. So it's really pro-social. And you're not trying to get them to tell you something. You're trying to get them to want to tell you something. And that for me is why I said the term needs to change. Because if people are going to realize that to influence others, you don't need to do it out of fear. Like we use a lot of tactics like scarcity, and tactics of, you have very limited time, or if you don't do this, something negative is going to happen. And that creates a negative psychological effect. And that is related to social engineering. And that's what we think about. So I know if I'm going to try and push people to use it ethically, you kind of have to change the term sometimes, because we get so locked in on the idea of this is what it means. So I was like, okay, let me move away from just social engineering, because that has the manipulation kind of tag to it. And let's make it fully pro-social. So you're influencing just positive emotions and you're moving away from the negative side.
And I think pro-social takes your reputation into account. So it's always easier to manipulate and trick someone or scam someone. But what happens to your reputation if you're known as the scammer? You're certainly not pro-social.
Yep. And that is such an important point, because I was doing an interview recently about the influence tactics I use, and was saying that these other negative tactics don't really work. And he said, well, no, they work amazingly. And I said, well, let me clarify. They don't work long term. So if you want an influence approach once, you want to make that sale, and you are just focused on that one sale, my tactics are not necessarily for you. You're going to be thinking, okay, how do I get this one deal? If you want long-term influence, if you want to not just create a sale, but you want to create a partnership, or you want to create a positive reputation, you want long-standing influence, this is where the positive tactics are so important. That's why reputation is so important. So yeah, absolutely. Creating scarcity and creating anger and fear will work for that one attempt. You might get your car sales, or you might make that business deal. But what about that relationship? And now if they feel hard done by, you're going to be losing business, because they're going to go and tell people how they feel. They're not going to come back. Their friends aren't going to come back. I want to teach the influence that is making you an influential person, a person that people want to work with, not just end up working with because they feel like they should.
And what often gets lost in that is, okay, you'll get the initial sale, but what if that person now doesn't refer their friends to you, right? If you're the used car salesman who sells the one car, but does it in a way that's scammy or manipulative, you're not going to get the referrals where the rest of their family members are going to come buy a car from you.
Yep. And this is what I call taking the long versus the short road. And if you take the short road, where you use the really easy tactics that are fast and effective, because influence where it's positive emotions is much slower than negative. It takes longer to build trust and rapport than it does to make someone act out of instinct. So it is the longer road. So you don't always get your wins as quickly. And maybe there's a speech you really want and someone else gets it that takes the short road. And you think, oh, maybe I should have lied about my skill set. Maybe I should have pretended that that other person's work was my own work and done what they did and get that win. But they took the short road. And you get those little wins, but eventually people start to feel hard done by, and they start to feel negative towards you. So the person taking the long road has a lot to catch up on. But the thing with the long road is, as you move forward, you leave people feeling good. You leave people wanting to keep working with you. So opportunities will keep arising. You actually do a good job. You're not overselling your skill set. So people rehire you. Maybe you didn't get that big win because they want someone that says, okay, you come in and you teach people how to be deception detection experts. And that other person takes the short road and says, oh yeah, my speech will do that. Everybody will leave as a lie detecting machine. They get the speech. And you go, no, that's not how it works. They go, okay, well, I don't want that. But you keep your integrity. When people don't leave as lie detection experts, they're not going to rehire that person. So the short road gets you those little wins, but the long road will overtake. And by miles and miles, it just takes longer. And that's why I always say, if you really want to be a powerful, influential leader, you have to have the patience to use the positive skill sets. And it can be a really hard thing to do, because that short road is tempting, especially when it's like, I could get a higher salary. I could get that bigger deal. I could make that quick sale. I don't want to have to put all the time into building these relationships. Fine, do that. But that other person that is doing the longer road, they'll eventually come out on top.
Yeah, it comes with a hidden cost that I think is difficult to see in the short-term view.
It does.
Now, you also talk about how important it is for influence to be guided by biopsychosocial principles, and really this combination of the three areas of science that create influence. I think a lot of us don't really think about that. We think, again, in the short term of like, what are the tricks or tactics? But unpack that for us.
Yeah, the reason that I wanted to do my framework this way is I don't say do X, Y, Z and you'll get this result. I say here's how people think and here's how you can apply it to each individual person. Because I think of it as like if you go to the doctors and you say I have this stomach ache, I'm feeling really unwell, and they go, "Oh, okay, I know what to do." And they give you these tablets and say take them 3 times a day. And you go, "Okay, great. So what's the problem?" And they go, "I don't know." And they go, "Okay, well, what do the tablets do?" And they go, "Oh, I don't know." But someone else came in with your same symptoms. They took these and now they feel great and their problems have gone away. So it will work for you. In that situation, you go, I don't just want to know that it worked for someone else. I want to know what the tablets do. I want to know that you know what you're doing. But when it comes to influence, we stand and listen to people say, do X, Y, Z, and it'll work for you because it worked for me. And we go, brilliant, thank you, and go off and do it. We don't always ask, well, how does it work? What's happening in the brain? Why does this tactic influence people? And how do you know that it influences people? We just kind of take it at face value. And then we go off and wonder why we don't get the results, or wonder why it worked with this person but not with this person. We don't need more people going, hey, do X, Y, Z, and it'll work 100% of the time. We have enough of that on TikTok. So I didn't want to give a list of tactics. What I wanted to do was say, here's how you can understand the basics of how people think. And obviously it's complicated. People are very complicated, but we need a basic understanding that we can then apply to other people. And I think of people like plants. So there are thousands of different kinds of plants. Look at a cheese plant versus a cactus, right? They're so different, but everything needs the same basic stuff: water, soil, sunlight. Well, if you look at a human being, we're also different, but we are 99.9% genetically identical. Our brains, although vastly individual, are structurally very much the same. So if you understand that the basics of how a human being thinks and works, you can take that understanding and utilize it to think, okay, well, how do I influence them to think the way that I want them to think? And that's that 1% or that 0.1% even, that individuality is so key. And a lot of people forget that it's biopsycho and social. They focus either just on the evolutionary or just on the right now or just on one field, and forget that if we really want to understand how people think, we need to take the biology and the psychology into consideration, but in a way that is understandable. Because if I just threw all of that science at people, they wouldn't really be able to do anything with it. So you need to kind of simplify it enough that people can do something with it, but not so much that it loses the integrity.
So, is there a way that you could walk us through the three sort of coming together in a simple principle?
I created the framework with 5 principles, and the 2 core principles, the most evolutionary driven, one is the drive to survive. Above every instinct that a human being has, we will survive by any means necessary. That is the most human instinct. So we seek safety and we avoid threats. And when we feel threatened, nothing else matters to escape that danger. And then the second principle is that we are designed to cooperate. We are a social species. We've lived in groups throughout evolution, and we've needed those social groups to survive. And these 2 principles are so important for influence, because think about it. If we seek safety and avoid threats, when you think about an interrogation or an interview, the first image that comes in your head is, that officer leaning over the desk shouting at the individual. Or we think, okay, well, how do I make them feel like they have to give me this information or bad things will happen? You trigger the survival drive. You become a threat. So if you're trying to influence someone and you don't realize that the most basic instinct, seek safety, avoid threats, and you become that threat, you're creating more cortisol in that person. Cortisol blocks information retrieval. So, put it simply, the brain is made of electric. We communicate, or our neurons communicate via electrical signals. So, if I'm trying to get information from the back of my brain, a neuron will pass a signal to another, go get the information, pass it back. So, my mouth, thought goes in, thought comes out the mouth, right? In, out. But the neuron needs to pass on a signal and then recharge to then bring it back, because it's a two-way process. Go get the information and give it to me. If there's too much cortisol, it can't recharge. So it can't actually get the information back. So when you're being really aggressive and you're saying, give me this, you're triggering that survival drive, increasing cortisol, and you're actually biologically reducing their ability to give you information. And that basic understanding is so important in any situation where it's a negotiation, an interview, an interrogation of, if you press too hard, you're creating a biological issue that they can't now access the information you want. So with that in mind, we then take principle number 2, that we're a social species. So what approaches are going to be more effective? Well, given we're designed to be social, or we've evolved to be social, building rapport, building trust, creating cooperation via that rapport building is going to be much more effective. And then there are 3 other principles that kind of build on those 2. And one is that we are our brains. If I said to you, would you prefer to have a brain transplant, keep your body, have someone else's brain, or keep your brain, have someone else's body? Most people would say, of course, my brain, because we are our brains. So if we want to influence people, having just a basic understanding of neural processes and how the brain works is really important. And then principle number 4 is the mind-body feedback loop, the fact that we are both biological and psychological in nature. So one influences the other. For example, there was an amazing study, and I love this study, that had 2 yogurts, and one was labeled full fat, one was labeled low fat. Same yogurt. And there's a hormone in our guts called ghrelin that tells us when we're full, it's released and says, hey, stop eating. They had both yogurts. Ghrelin was released faster when they drank the yogurt that said full fat, because we expected it to be. So the thought changed the biology. And now, of course, our biology, the way our brain works, our cortisol, our hormones, serotonin, all of these things that are biological, they change how we think. So one influences the other. So if you change someone's environment, you can change their thinking. If you change their thinking, you can change how they interact with the environment. So that understanding is really important for influence too. And then the final one is where that 1 or 0.1% comes in, self-identity. The self-identity refers to the way we perceive ourselves to be, our characteristics, qualities, beliefs that define who we are. And we like to believe that the way we see ourselves reflects our true nature. And we are motivated to preserve that nature. So if you're trying to influence someone with that understanding, think about, who is that person? What matters to that person? How do they see themselves? Because if you're trying to influence them in a way that makes them contradict their self-image, they're not going to do it. Like, if I'm someone who is very stoic, I'm going to see being emotionally restrained as a sign of strength. If I'm someone who is very vulnerable, I'm going to see openness and transparency as a sign of strength. So if I'm trying to influence that person, an understanding of their self-identity is going to really help me shape my influence approach.
I love that.
I'd love to drill down in the first principle around the survival instinct, because I think for a lot of us, that example of the interrogation, leaning on the desk, yes, that feels threatening. But there are a lot of other things that we do when we're trying to influence people that we don't realize or recognize as threatening. What are some examples of ways that we might appear threatening without even realizing it?
I got asked this recently by a friend of mine. He said that he was having issues with a current client, and the current client has bought from them many, many times. But this time he's holding out because there's a competitor that he's been going to. So they gave him an ultimatum. If anyone who has ever been given an ultimatum by their partner, you will know it doesn't feel good, because we give ultimatums when we're desperate because we think, okay, this will pressure them into going my direction. But ultimatums are threats disguised as choices. Because if we think about that survival drive that we seek safety and avoid threats, what is so important for that is that we feel we are in control. When we are not in control, it feels unsafe. Our brain can't predict the outcome. And being able to predict the outcome is safety. That's what the brain is craving. That's why routine is so important for so many of us, because it's predictable. That's why partners who are inconsistent makes us feel so unsafe and our nervous system so unsettled, because we can't predict what's happening. So we seek this sense of control, and we like to feel, okay, I know what's going to happen. So if you give someone an ultimatum, you are threatening their sense of control, because it now, like I said, it's a threat disguised as a choice.
Yeah, and that ability to choose is so important. I know when we're trying to influence someone, we want to narrow their number of choices and hope they make the choice that we want, but we still have to give them choice to allow them to feel that control.
Yep. And this is why I teach one thing that is really great for that, where you're giving them a choice, but you're not really. So you're allowing them to feel they are in control. So if I'm influencing, one thing, when I think of that survival principle, I'm thinking, how do I not threaten it? And how do I satisfy it? How do I give them a sense of safety? So I want them to take a particular route, but I want them to feel like they chose to take that route. So I'll give them a structured choice. So say I'm in an interview and I want a suspect to cooperate with me. What I might say, instead of saying, okay, well, tell me what happened here, I'm going to say, would you like to start from the beginning, or would you like to go over things we've already covered in a little bit more detail? Now they're choosing the route of the conversation. So they have a little bit of a choice of, okay, where am I taking this conversation? They don't really have a choice, because I'm still getting the thing that I want, but I'm giving them a perceived choice. I'm giving them perceived control.
And allowing them to then actually act on that choice creates in their mind the psychological safety that allows them to move forward, versus saying, tell me what happened here.
Exactly. And it creates psychological investment too, because if I've given you a choice of, do you want to go here or here, and you've chosen to go here, once we choose something, we become more invested into it. If someone says this is a route that we're taking, we're less psychologically invested, so we're going to be less cooperative. And one thing too that people really shy away from doing is reminding people you can say no. Like if I'm interviewing a suspect, or if I'm reading them their rights and I want them to waive their claim to having an attorney present, one thing that officers will really shy away from doing, and it's the same in negotiation, is reminding them they can say no, because they think, oh, if I tell them they can say no, they're going to say no. They know they can say no. They know they don't have to talk to you. In a negotiation or an interview, they know they have free will. But when you remind someone that they can say no, and you remind them that they don't have to be there, you're showing them that they have a choice. You're giving them perceived control. So they feel like it's less of a threat. So often when you say to people, like, you are more than welcome to walk away from this, that is absolutely in your right to do so, and I won't stop you. But what I would really like to do is I would like to be able to help you. And I would really like to see your side of the story, if you will allow me to provide you that support. And if you will allow me to see what your side of the story is. They're going to be more willing to stay and have a conversation with you than if you go, I need you to talk to me. You have to talk to me, or come and talk to me. But we shy away from doing it often. And it's the same in business deals, reminding people that they don't have to be there, and they don't have to attend this, or they don't have to be part of something. It doesn't make them more likely to leave it. It makes them more likely to stay.
Oftentimes, the no can be very helpful in influencing other people. We get afraid of the no maybe we're trying to get something from people and we don't want to hear no. It doesn't lead us to the decision that we want them to make. But that no can actually be really helpful in the sales process to stop following up and wasting time with this person, or handle what might be an objection that you didn't cover in your presentation from that no. So giving them the choice and allowing them to say no actually makes them more likely to be influenced.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, one thing that strikes me in all of this, learning the tactics and the strategies, is it can feel very inauthentic, especially when you're just starting out and you're trying to influence people. But you write in the book that authenticity is actually a really key part of this. And when we're being inauthentic, we actually lose our ability to influence.
The way that I try and teach it is you have a coin and you have both sides of the coin. Now, when it comes to being trustworthy, we think of it as a mask. And I think that that is such a harmful way to think about it in the long term. Again, if you want to do that one deal, then it's probably going to work for you. But if you really want to be influential and have those long partnerships, you have to think of both sides. And now both sides is being perceived as and being. So being perceived as confident and being perceived as trustworthy, it will open doors. But if you walk in the room and you're not trustworthy, you'll get kicked out of the room eventually. But if you are trustworthy, but you don't know how to present yourself as trustworthy, the door won't open. So you have to understand how to present yourself in a trustworthy way, how to have good nonverbal communication, how to speak to people. But that doesn't mean that's all you need, those tactics to get through the door. Because like I said, once you're in the room, what now? What happens now if you're inconsistent? That's why it's also really important to realize that when it comes to influence and persuasion, it's not just about that one move. It's actually, how do I understand what people need? And how do I become someone that's trustworthy? How do I actually understand how to make people feel safe? How do I understand how to be someone people trust? And it's like with trust, we think about, how do I get trust? How do I gain trust? And even that thinking is wrong, because as a species, we are trustworthy. We have evolved to be trusting, because we wouldn't be a social species otherwise. If we were naturally skeptical, we wouldn't be able to have the social group survival. So as we've evolved and now we're in a modern society, our nature is still trusting. We trust by default, but we have learned to be skeptical. So we fight our natural instinct as a social species, because we know that it's in our best interest to be skeptical. So actually, if we realize that nature, that principle number 2, that naturally we're a social species, we change the phrasing. Okay, well, it's not that I need to convince people to be trusting. It's that I need to show them I'm trustworthy. So instead of focusing on that tactic of the short term, get what I want, how do I get trust? How do I show I'm trustworthy? How do I be trustworthy? And we frame it like that. That's also why I say the long road, because it means really looking at the way you treat people, the way you interact with yourself, and think, what isn't working for me and why? And how do I embed this as a long-term change? Not a strategy, not a how do I use it to get what I want, or instead, how do I actually become someone that people want to give this to?
In the rise of AI, words are even cheaper. They can be generated instantly. Actions and you following through on those words that you sent in the AI generated email or you use in the proposal, that's what actually fosters that trust that we're looking for.
I'm seeing this especially with AI for speakers and trainers, where they're using AI to generate a lot of material, or students in essays. And that's where the perceiving is. Okay, you've fronted that you know this, but then you ask a little deeper. Well, how does this work? Well, where did you get your information? Well, why does it work? Explain it to me. And when they're unable to go that deeper level, that's where the perception starts to break. And we realize that this isn't really your knowledge. And that's where we lose trust. And a lot of people are taking these shortcuts. They're teaching things they don't understand. They're talking on topics they don't understand. Or they're doing things at that surface level And then when you dig a little deeper, the trust is broken, and it's much quicker to lose trust than it is to build it. And that's why whether it's negotiation, whether it's in a business meeting or a speech, if you don't know something, pretending that you do and getting that information from AI is not a smart strategy. It's better to actually say, oh, I don't actually know, or that isn't my field. We feel like if we don't have an answer for everything, it will counteract our expertise. And people will think, oh, I'm not going to trust their information. But it does the reverse. When we're able to say, oh, I don't know enough about that to have an opinion, or I don't know enough about that to teach on it, it creates more trust.
And I think people fall into that same trap with authenticity. They often think they have to be perfect and they have to get everything right. And that's what allows them to be authentic. But it's actually inauthentic. And the imperfection can build that trust and grow that influence. And you even have a section of the book on pantsing yourself,
Yes.
which gave me a laugh in reading it, and how that does actually bring people closer to you. So let's talk about that, because that misconception, we see it even with our clients. Like they aim for perfection, they're perfectionists. And in reality, that's robbing them of the authenticity they need to grow their influence.
When I say pantsing ourselves, it's kind of like exposing our vulnerability. And this idea kind of came to me because I was in a meeting where the other person was really aggressive. And when you are having someone be aggressive to you, it's really easy to be aggressive back. And when someone is like that, say they are a client or someone you still want something from, often saying you are being very aggressive right now, even though you are perfectly entitled to do so, it can create shame in them. So when you say to someone you're doing something wrong, even when they are doing something wrong, it creates dislike from them to you. And if you want something from that person, that is not in your best interest to do. But we have ego and we like to be right. And say someone says something wrong and you know they said it wrong, it feels really good to correct them. For that minute, it feels really good to be like, I know this and you don't. And we all want to do it. It's like when someone puts the wrong yaw, you really want to correct them with the right yaw. But it can create dislike from that person to you. But sometimes we need to remove ourselves from that meeting. So instead of, okay, you're being really aggressive right now, you need to chill out or something like that, putting it on them. The way I have done it is if you expose your vulnerability, it's really hard for someone to continue to be aggressive. So instead of you're being aggressive right now, the way I play it is I don't feel that I am emotionally equipped right now to be able to provide you what you need. I am really struggling with this conversation. I put it on me. I'm the issue now, but I'm making it, I'm the issue and I want to benefit you. Right now, like, okay, we're having this conversation. Clearly, this conversation isn't being productive. I don't feel that this conversation is productive because I'm not going to be able to provide you what you need right now. Let us regroup. Let me take a breath, and then let's come back and talk about it. So instead of me saying, you're really angry, go and chill out and then come back. They're not going to be chilling out. They're going to be stewing. They're going to come back probably angrier or with a plan of, okay, I don't want to work with this person. Instead, I've taken the brunt of that. And the reason that this technique, even though so simple, is so hard is because we are ego-driven creatures. And it is a hard thing to do to put our ego to the side and put the blame on ourselves and pants ourselves and show our vulnerability to someone we really don't have a positive feeling towards right now. It's like if you're a cashier or you're a cook in a restaurant and you have a customer who is shouting at you and being aggressive, you don't want to be polite to them. You want to spit in their food. But you have to sometimes pants yourself and be polite, and then you see them chill out. You see them feel bad, become sympathetic. And we had someone email us about our information elicitation course. I created an online information elicitation course. It's purely audio. And it was a short course designed for people that it was very cheap. It was only a couple of $100, but it was kind of like an intro to people that really wanted to get into the field but weren't able to afford these really intense courses. And we had someone email in and said there wasn't an interactive element involved. And we had said, well, that was why it was so cheap. And we wanted to kind of give people what we could. And they were very aggressive. And they had said that, I can get this on ChatGPT and do this. And I had emailed back and said, well, we don't use AI for our information. We have experts that take their time to perfectly craft this. And then under that, I wrote, but I really admire how driven you have been. And he had said something else about, I have gone to this course and read this course and I've been looking in this and I can get this information. So I complimented him on his seeking of knowledge. And I said, I really admire that you have sought out all of this information. I was a professor on it. A lot of my students, it was really hard to get them to go and read research papers. So, good for you that you're doing those things. I love to see it. And I'm sorry that my course was not what you had hoped it had been and there wasn't an interactive element. And then I patched myself and said, I would have loved to, but we are very busy for time. So if we did an interactive course, it would have been a lot more expensive. So I wanted to provide you something that we could. So instead of me just being reactive and saying, well, we use our experts to create this course, we don't use AI, and kind of left it at that. Underneath that, instead, I showed my vulnerability and I complimented him and was very polite and was not reactive at all. And the next email back he'd sent was he had admired our work and is going to use the refund that I'm giving on the course to buy my books and things like that. So the whole tone changed and it was very grateful and very thankful and very polite. And you can shift someone from real anger to actually very sorry and very polite when you pants yourself like that.
It's counterintuitive and really hard in the moment, especially when you're feeling those emotions and it feels personal.
It's like I said, it's a hard thing to do because the tactic itself is very simple, but it takes a lot of background work. And that's why I say, again, the long road, because in order to be able to do that tactic effectively, you have to have good emotional regulation. You have to not act as soon as you feel something. And that does take a lot of time to develop that skill to not be reactive.
I want to go deep on the fifth principle because I think this one we haven't covered as much on the show, and it's one that it's so impactful when you understand it. And a lot of us don't even realize how much our own identity is driving our behaviors and actions in our own lives. So let's go a level deeper here on, what is this identity component and how can we start to recognize it in others to use it to our advantage to influence?
Yep. So the self-identity is that there's a couple things. One, we all have our own identity of how we see ourselves. And people want to feel consistent with who they believe they are. So if I believe I'm a kind person, I want to feel like other people believe I'm a kind person. If I believe I'm a strong person, I want to feel other people do. So we also like to be consistent. So if I see myself as a strong person, when I put in a situation where I really don't want to persevere, I will remind myself, especially if there's people around, of, no, I'm a strong person. This is my identity. I have to do this. So you're more likely to do it. Same if you see yourself as kind, mothering, loving, warm, and say someone falls over or someone needs help with something, you really don't want to help them. But you're like, no, my identity is this, so I'm going to do it. And that's why that victim mentality is so harmful, because we put ourselves in situations where we could get out of them, but because we have a victim mentality, we don't, because I'm the victim. So this is so important for influence, because if you challenge someone's identity, if they see themselves a certain way and you contradict that, like say they see themselves as really strong and you make a joke about them being weak, you've now created dissonance in their head of, I see myself this way and now I have this alternative opinion. What do you think is going to happen? It triggers a survival drive. So we go back to that first principle of, oh, I want to get away from you now. We don't like to be around people that trigger that survival drive. So when it comes to influence, we want to try and understand a person. And we want to align our message with their values and self-image. And if we do so, they're more likely to listen. So if I want someone to provide me information, I want to start to understand who they are. And say they see themselves as a protective person. Well, because I recognize now that that's their self-image, I'm going to craft the way I propose my message in a way that doing so, providing me that information, is protecting people. If they see themselves as a loyal person, providing me that information, or say I'm a car salesman, I now understand what's important to you. I'm going to use that to shift doing this thing is in line with how you see yourselves. And it's also, if you understand what's most core to that person. So if you get to know me, you'll realize like I am a scientist through and through. My life is my work. I love psychology. I live and breathe it. And there is no separating me from what I do. So that's so core to who I am. And I'm very big into health and fitness. That's so core to who I am. And then I love things like the arts and I love nature. They're important to me, but they're not core to who I am. So if you understand what makes up someone's core identity, if you're crafting an influence approach and you use nature as, let's do this and you'll be able to, say you're selling me a property and you utilize a nature approach. Might be convincing, but if you understand what's important to me, okay, well, how does this fit into health and fitness? And how does this fit into locations to science centers or access to work? Or what is it like for business? Those things are going to be much more core to who I am. But it also means, what do you avoid contradicting? So if you know what's core to how someone sees himself, you know what not to accidentally contradict and what not to press on. Because a lot of people will use kind of like little jokey tactics and banter and kind of like prod at people. Most people don't like that. Most people don't like little prods into their self-identity, even if it's kind of fun and playful. You have to really be close to a person to use those kind of tactics. Most people get really agitated by those kinds of things. So you know what to avoid. And also, because we like to be consistent, say I'm trying to get someone to provide me information or do something, what I might draw on is a previous time they have done something similar. Because if I draw on that time, they want to show, oh, I'm still a consistent person. So it's going to kind of push them in that direction of, well, you did it before, so what's changed now?
It's so key because that identity, if you get it wrong, can trigger shame and embarrassment, which again go back to that survival instinct that we don't want to feel that in any situation where we're being pressured. And you can call out if their identity is intellectual. I love that you're pursuing this new area of knowledge, meaning they have a gap. They might be dumb in that area, but you've called out that they are intellectual. So you've tapped into their identity and celebrated that in a way to take the next step in working with you.
I call this speaking their language. And it doesn't mean, copying their slang or their accent. It means, what are their communication styles? What are their priorities? What is their worldview? So if someone is very direct, that it is part of their identity, versus someone who likes to sugarcoat things and kind of likes to be a little bit more talkative and go around the issue. If you understand that, you can speak their language, adapt your communication style to be more appropriate to their communication style. But this means listen first, because that self-identity is so important. But if we rush into the influence approach and we don't take the time to build that rapport, how are we going to understand enough about them to kind of craft an effective approach? So the most important part of that self-identity principle is listen first. Pay attention to how they describe things. Do they focus on numbers or people or feelings or facts? That tells you a lot about their priorities. If they focus on feelings, maybe they like the emotional element a little bit more, and you can take that approach. If they focus just on the facts, they're not really going to care when you're focusing so much on how this feels. They want to get to the real core of, okay, what can it do for me? And then also, even though it's speaking their language in terms of matching their communication styles and making them feel understood, you can actually mirror keywords. So if someone is saying that something is risky, don't say it's exciting, say it's a calculated risk. So you really want to kind of understand the way they speak. And then also it's important to be adaptable. You're not imitating them. So you're not pretending to be them. You're showing them that you can meet them where they are. And there really is a big difference. You're not mocking or saying, oh yeah, me too. I'm exactly the same. You're just being adaptable. You're validating them and you're showing them, okay, I understand and I appreciate your point of view. And I'm going to validate it.
In order to be influential, you really have to understand your own core identities and what's central to you and how it motivates and makes you tick. That allows you to then adapt in these moments to recognize it in others.
And that is really important for the we are our brains principle, because part of that principle is understanding that the brain is such an energy hungry organ. It weighs 2% of our body mass, but it takes up 20% of our energy. So it takes a lot to function. And we think about how much we do unconsciously. When you walk through the door, you just kind of go about your day. Like as you get home, maybe from the gym or from work, you don't think about, let me put my bag on the counter, let me put my shoes here. You just kind of do things unconsciously. And we go about our day mostly unconsciously. And if I ask you, what do you think about this thing? In general, we like to kind of get the first answers that we can. We don't like to deeply think about everything because it is very energy consuming to think deeply. And there was a study looking at chess players and how many calories they burn. And in a professional chess match, they burn about the same amount of calories as an athlete running a marathon because of the mental power that it takes. Now, the brain is so energy hungry. And with that means that the brain tries to simplify the world. And this is why this principle is so important. Because the brain tries to simplify the world so we can interact effectively, it creates biases because it needs to understand things as simply as possible, and it creates little mistakes. And a really common one is the halo effect. We see someone with one positive characteristic, so we assume positivity over other characteristics. We see that they're attractive, so we go, oh, they're trustworthy, or they're smart. Or we have a reverse halo effect, which is also a bias of we see a negative trait and we assume negativity over other traits. So maybe someone is a little bit mean, so we assume they're dishonest because it's that they have one trait that's negative or positive, so we assume over others. Now, this is why it's so important, like you said, to understand ourselves. Because if we don't realize this is something that is just, it is a byproduct of having such a powerful brain, every single person on this planet is prone to cognitive biases. And if we don't recognize that and think it's so common, people think everybody else is biased except me. That's called the blind spot bias, which is the tendency to believe that you are less biased than other people. And it is a very common bias. And there's a lot of self-serving biases because we don't realize that it's just a side effect of having such a powerful brain. And having that self-serving bias actually makes you more biased than other people. Because if you recognize that you have flaws in your thinking, you're more likely to stop and pause and reflect on them. But if you don't recognize that your thinking is flawed, and that you can be influenced just as easily as everybody else, you're less likely to have that moment of pausing and stopping and reflecting and thinking, is someone else influencing my decisions?
Looking at the framework in totality, how can our audience use it in those crucial moments where they really want to be influential, like negotiating a salary or those pivotal moments where we really want to prepare and lean in? What is your view on preparation around influence, especially using the framework?
For everyone, it's a little bit different. And I don't like to say do X, Y, Z, because for some people, they're more like, I'm very diagram focused. So people who are like me that are very structured might sit before a big meeting. I'm going to think about my approach, and I'm actually going to have the upper hand in front of me. And I'm going to have, I have a diagram where I have kind of each principle on each finger. And then I'm going to work through my approach. And as I'm doing it, I'm going to make a note of, does this create conflict with any one of these principles? And does it accommodate any of these principles, and which ones? And for me, that is a really effective approach of actually writing down and seeing it on the upper hand. For some other people, they might focus more heavily on one that feels more right to them. So say you're someone who is very, very social and very talkative, you're very extroverted. That self-identity principle might be where you really, really focus, because you're thinking, okay, I really want to get to know this person, so I'm going to spend a lot of time on this. And if you're someone who is a little bit more aggressive, you might want to spend more time on that survival principle, because you're going to realize, instead of thinking, okay, well, where's my benefit? Think, okay, well, where's my weakness? What is it that I really struggle with? And let me take that principle and let me make sure my main focus is to not accidentally threaten that principle. And if you're someone who is very well versed in influence, you might be a step forward and think about the hand as a whole, like I do now, where I think about it as a whole instead of focusing on what area can I best focus my attention and what can I avoid counteracting. Now you're going to take, say, a principle and look at, does it complement one of these? Does it complement two or three? And does it not contradict all of them? And it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of practice. But you have to remember too that, say you're just focusing on the pinky, and the pinky is the self-identity. If I use my pinky, I can use my pinky differently from my thumb, but it's much more effective if I use it as a whole hand. And say you're focusing so much on self-identity, but you get so annoyed that it's taking time that you use that ultimatum. So now you've just threatened one of the core principles. So all that work you've done building rapport, you've just lost it, because now you've become a threat. So it does take a lot of time, but I say, if you're just getting into it, focus on the areas you're the weakest on, where you're threatening the principles. So you want to first avoid threatening them and then work on, okay, well, how do I now facilitate them?
And for that visual reference of the hand as a guide versus a force, I think as you learn these principles, it gets really excited to put everything behind any one of those fingers or that whole hand. And of course, we're then tripping that first principle where we're really forcing someone versus guiding them towards a decision.
What we have to remember too is, because of that pinky finger, that individuality, when we use the evolutionary tactics, like there is, let's use a really common example I hear on podcasts a lot. Typically those male-dominated podcasts where they talk about women want this and men want this. They talk about, women seek resources and men seek fertility. And, they want youth, fertility. And great, that is evolutionarily. And that is what we call the ultimate causation. But with evolutionary theory, there are two parts, ultimate and proximal. And people forget that it's two parts. Proximal means that feeling right now. So if I donate to charity, I don't go, well, my ancestors who acted pro-socially were more likely to procreate, so I'm doing this because it's in my genes. No, you think, I do it because it feels good. And it's that feeling of goodness, which is the proximal cause. And if we go back to relationships, say I am evolutionarily focused to look for a strong man because they're a protector. It is in our DNA to want signs of strength. But say I have personally gone through abusive relationships. What I might want now is a sense of peace. And I'm going to want someone that can actually make me feel comfort. So that proximal experience of what I have been through can override that evolved function. And now it makes me seek something different, even though maybe in my DNA, there is that drive to want strength. Absolutely. But I'm not always just an animal instinct kind of creature. We have free will and we have our personal experiences. And that's where that proximal causation comes in, where we forget that people are people and they go through experiences and it shapes them. So we need to consider that 1% of, okay, yes, maybe these are the scientific drivers in general, but who is this person and what have they been through? And that means that your approach for even just that one principle might be different for 3 people. Say you have 3 people, it's going to look very different. Same principle, but because you have the evolved driver and then the proximal driver, the approach you take is going to be different on each of those. So that's really important to recognize that you can't just get that upper hand up there, stick tactics to it, and say this will work for everyone. It is very different with every person, and everyone is different. That self-identity and their personal experiences will shape what's effective to them. So taking the time to try and understand the person is really important.
As we close, do you think there's a habit that our audience would benefit from in order to grow their influence?
The most helpful thing to do is regulate your emotions. Because to use any of these tactics, it does take a lot of emotional control because we want to react. It's like I said about the pantsing ourselves. If you are so reactive, even if you come in with an amazing plan, but you are not in control of your emotions, you will not enact that plan, not effectively, because you're going to be triggered really easily and you're going to just react. So the very first step when it comes to being influential, before you think about, okay, what are my exact tactics, is understanding how to regulate yourselves and how to be self-aware and recognize your limitations too, before you now go in and think that you can be a master of influence.
Well, thank you for joining us again, Abbie. Where can our audience find out more about this book and all of your great courses?
You can find all of my work on abbiemorano.com. I'm really active on Instagram, which is Dr. Abbie Official, and then Dr. Abbie Morano on Instagram, on LinkedIn.
Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Abbie.